Alright, struggle for the Galactic Empire. If you watch me much, you know I'm not a big fan of solo games. And this one actually brought to mind almost immediately a comparative point with a recent solo game that I did. Cruel Necessity by Victory Point Games, the States of Siege game. That was a game in which it felt like it got theme down without getting topic down, in the sense that everything was very related and to the historical matters at hand. But I didn't feel like I had access to the levers that would actually change things. What I had was access to a gameplay within that historical context. Very rich historical context, much richer than any Euro does, but like a Euro, it was a kind of a theme in the sense that I wasn't getting a simulation that allowed me to put inputs in and get outputs that were expected. This game is almost the opposite for me. And to some extent, I think all solo design games, or most of them, have some of this aspect, but let me go through it. I felt like this did a very good job, actually, of providing the topic. I felt like my decisions were very well based on, what I wanted to change, and that I could make little tinkers in my force composition, this, that, and the other. And because it's more of a straight war game, that makes more sense. But unfortunately, on the theme side, this felt a little dull. And it's not the topic. I mean, man, this is the topic that or one of a few topics that I really, really would love to get the whole boat on. Freedom in the Galaxy comes close for me in this, in terms of capturing the type of flavor of this that I'd like. But Freedom in the Galaxy is Star Wars, and this is the Foundation series. So this obviously is a more interesting topic than some space opera, much as that's very character-based, and that's what provides some of that theme and flavor to it. In the case of this one, it might be the almost generic feel of the event pile. I get the feeling, so first of all, there's this double counter set, so you get the same events coming up again and again. And this is not a real blow against the game, because Sword in the Stars, and I'd say Empires of the Middle Ages, have this same kind of, geez, I'm not sure I really feel terribly like I'm in space or running a medieval empire here. And that's kind of what this came down to. The decisions were very, very well grounded in the forces I have, in the kinds of different special abilities I can use, etc. But the extent of the event pool just isn't deep enough. And this is still pretty, there's a lot of counters here. You get the feeling, actually, given that some of the aliens are almost repetitive and stuff, that it was a matter of Miranda running out of ideas to fill the chits with. That maybe somebody, to fill the chits with and still keep them relatively generic in feel. And that's kind of one of the problems, is that attempt to keep it generic in feel, so that you're not facing, something that's very, very well defined as part of a story or whatnot that would normally happen. I don't know. I mean, the Messiah seems pretty specific. The aliens seem pretty specific. The Institute seems pretty specific. But somehow it just doesn't convey that flavor to me in the same way that, well, obviously Europa Universalis does with all its events, but I'm trying to think of something that manages It doesn't convey it in the sense that Sword in the Stars even does, with the Dakafal, and wait, that's from Glorianta, isn't it? Draka, something like that. There's something that sounds a lot like Dakafal that's in Sword of the Stars. That's just a xenophobic race that's out to destroy everything. You have the right to kind of fill that storyline in this when you look at, hey, what's an invader? Are they here to kill or what? Well, they're certainly not really there to conquer. The usurpers, those are a nice pattern in the sense that you'd expect the empire to have regular flag emperors, as in Traveller, like the old emperors of Rome who would march an army into the city and capture it. That feels proper and isn't terribly disturbing. It may be something just wrong with me that I don't get that real taste for it. It's the same, I don't know. I don't want to go into that one. All right, so let's talk about it more as a game, though. Well, first let's look at the components. I actually think the counters are very, very nice. Although, again, there's not a lot of differentiation and a lot of different things. So after coming off of Dragon Pass with all its special magical units and everything, this does seem a little dull for that, and that may be some of my feeling there. The double printing of the counter sheet is a little weird. It does end up giving you twice as many events. But like I said, it seems at times Miranda was stretching to fill out the single counter sheet he had to. You have some nice player aids here. This little compendium of all the stuff in a separate booklet. It's in the rule books as well, but having it separate, that's really, really helpful in a game like this. It's something you have to reference constantly. The expedition results table, combat results table on a chart. It's a little flimsy. This is core of the game. This isn't really adding anything. You need these charts. It's good that they're not in the rule book. It's good that they're not on the map. There's plenty on the map. And that was actually maybe one of my gripes, but how much, in terms of player aid can you expect? There's a lot of information contained on the map. The map itself is beautiful, and this is what you're going to lose out on, in my view, if you go to the second edition. I found that map less attractive. It also apparently had a printing error, but I believe Decision Games made that all good to everyone and sent them out a new copy of the map, which, that's... You wouldn't have seen that in SPI's day. It would have been, take a big marker and change your map. The rule book, as I complained in the introduction, it's completely procedural, but I don't see a way to get around that in a game that's a solo designed game. They tend to be that way. So much of the rules has to be running that AI that you're just not going to get a really good overview of what the game is. You're going to get a general feel, and I think the game gives a good feel for that. Although I have to say the introduction to this, which is kind of like an SFB scenario introduction, the old captain's logs used to have these where, they go into a description of the actual ship fight. Okay, well that kind of makes sense in SFB because you're doing ship-to-ship combat. But here, hey, this has almost nothing to do with the story of the game. I would have rather had something that grounded this empire better rather than a kind of exciting little gunfight between a couple of spaceships or whatever. But that's okay. The rules seem fairly complete, and I don't think I found a lot of issues with them in terms of, something that was actually missing. They read okay for procedural rules. I think they did a pretty good job with them, actually. I grump about them because they're procedural, because that's hard on me. Okay. Back to the game itself that I wanted to talk about. So I guess the biggest gripe, for me, it's very hard to say much of anything about it because it's a made-for-solo game, and those just never strike home for me. So I try to put myself into this, okay, well, what is it that the guys who play these games like? You have your B-17 type, where it's all about the story and what's happening. And this, maybe you'd be overwhelmed with the amount of decision-making for that, to get that B-17-ish feel. I mean, for me, it felt like B-17 was just like playing a baseball simulator, where you have almost no decisions and you're just rolling dice. So there, it's just all you have is the story. You have the story here, but it's not very personalized. You might grow attached to a leader or something, but largely it feels more like you're playing a competitive war game in the sense of, you're trying to figure out how to optimize your move at all times, more than that you're really getting engrossed in the story. Ambush is one of the few games that I feel like really engrosses you in the story and gives you a lot of choice and a lot of good. Yeah, I'll do it someday. a lot of real life choice. It almost feels like here. It feels like you're commanding the Empire from above. There's no question of that. It just kind of, I don't know. There's nothing to imagine for me. The ships are just flying around to do their optimized attacks on any given turn. I'm in location A, I go to, location B with a cluster to do this type of attack because it does the best I can do, whatever. What else about it? So one of the other things that people like in a solitaire game is a challenge. This game seems easy to me, but I've only played the first scenario. The others are more challenging, that seems clear. But there is, or was, sufficient outcry about that. Now maybe it's just people who played the first scenario, because those later scenarios look tougher to meet their victory conditions. And I wouldn't be shocked if they provided sufficient challenge for me. However, Decision Games listened to most of the advice and ended up making some significant changes, from what I understand. I've been told about these only. One of them is they changed the Messiah, so he's... I haven't looked at the living rules, but the Messiah is kind of weird, the way he can just sort of totally destroy the game. Now, I actually would like more things like that really can shake up the game. In a sense, the Institute can, but in your positive effect. Especially if you get your chaos down low. They also changed the map, and I think it looks uglier, at least from the pictures that I've seen. And at the very least, they made the game a little bit more difficult. And that little bit more difficult probably will satisfy the need to have a more of a challenging game. But if you wanted to play it again and again, you could just try to keep beating your score. Or, again, those later scenarios do look harder. I don't have the will to play them. They're not going to be different enough. They might provide a different challenge. But in terms of what I'm going to see, it just doesn't interest me. And that's because I'm not into these kind of solo games. So I guess those are the major things there. The AI is largely, your opponent is largely just going to be a random events coming at you, but it does have kind of this cute little, hey, what does the AI do? So once they're actually on the board, you can't be exactly sure of what they're going to accomplish. It feels to me that each scenario is sort of a puzzle that can be optimized. And that's common with, again, with the made-for-solo games. So I don't want to right away throw that out of hand as a real negative. For me, that's not a pleasant thing. I don't like a puzzle. But when I say to be optimized, so for example in that first one, it seemed very clear that reducing my chaos level was the easy way to get into a role in which there's going to be less of, and maybe it's true in every scenario. Reduce your chaos, try to conquer others using the psionic abilities so that you flip them over to your side. You get more chaos reduction that way. You get troops that way. You still are going to need military because usually your enemies are going to have a weakness. Then again, usually you're going to have a weakness too. But you have the ability to kind of pre-plan what you're going to do. You don't have to just react to your enemy. You can set your pieces up once you know an enemy's on a board to make it impossible that they can get hit, you know, or to defend a planet so that you don't lose it. I almost wish that I could convince myself to play other scenarios, because maybe that flavorlessness of the first scenario would go away if there were empires that lasted that I couldn't just knock out very quickly. But my feeling is that I've gotten a taste of most of the different things the game can throw at me. And it's just going to be a difficulty factor issue, which is what really keeps me from actually doing that, playing it out. Anyway, for me, again, this is a topic that I had to buy this, even though it was solitaire, because it was a topic that just excited me so much. The description of the game thrilled me, and I think it meets that description. It does all the things it does. It doesn't do the things I'd imagine it would do if it were a richer game than it is. It's just not... it's not rich enough for me, even though it may be one of the richer solo designed games out there in terms of the amount of stuff and variety and realistic choices, etc., that it's facing you with. It's just not my cup of tea to play these designed for solo games usually. I'm not quite sure how this one would work with an opponent, though. Miranda points this out, is I wanted to do this design, and then when I thought about it, it seemed obvious that it had to be a solo design because the forces of chaos being controlled by one person doesn't really make sense. They are more of a random factor. I could actually see it as almost a co-op game or a semi-co-op where different forces within the Empire have different goals. They all want to keep the Empire alive, something more like Republic of Rome. Republic of Rome, in terms of people will have different special interests that they want to protect, that, you know, maybe certain systems or whatever, and that could actually be all hidden. That would be almost an expansion to the game. With how survivable the game sort of is, I think it would be actually a very interesting sort of game to provide somebody with individual commands out there and planets and maybe some secret goals and some open ones as sort of an extension to this base system to allow it to be played as a multiplayer game. And I think I would really love that. The players are all still on the side of the Empire. The AI still runs the threats, but there's a division of interest in terms of what to protect. You know, you could do this in a different way. You could do it with break the Empire into the 4 quadrants, give each player a quadrant straight up. Make the core, any decisions made in the core, to be made as kind of a joint decision of some sort by majority rule. And just play it that way, where each person has an individual goal to keep, so there'd be a collective goal to keep the Empire in the best shape possible, but each person has an individual goal to improve their own sector as best as they can. it would take more than just that simple addition. But that little addition might actually even make things kind of interesting without some sort of formal victory conditions with it. Anyway, that was just a thought off the top of my head. I don't have the kind of energy to ever devote to, spelling something out like that completely. I might just throw together and play it sometime, but I'm not going to actually write it up or anything or try to play test it as a regular thing. Alright, anyway, interesting game. It disappoints me simply because it is not my type of thing. But I think it could be very interesting for someone who does like solo games. And again, the challenge can be, you can tweak around with the rules as they are even in the first edition to make the challenge harder. And as far as I understand, the second edition rules are online and should provide somewhat more difficult game. Maybe too difficult for the other scenarios. Let's send this up.